So this is something like to give a quick devlog idea about what I'm working on and something like Lords of the Desolate. And it's because I think that the new Lords of the Fallen from 2023 from Hexworks is sort of like a Dark Souls video game. It is amazing. I've also enjoyed playing Wu Chang this year, and what was it? There are some other just really difficult video games, and so like I really enjoyed Dead Space, especially Dead Space 2 and 3. I thought had like an amazing setting. I don't think it was like the best video games, but there was something about the art and something like the world that they had created in especially Dead Space 2 and 3 that was really good. The game itself and perhaps the theater and the voice acting, I'm not sure it was the best, but the setting was really cool. So in the last video, I just sort of like went over how I have for now tried to create these sort of like 8 bosses here, and I really want to go into like detail and something like go over them again and again and again, what it is that they represent. And the idea is something like, what are the Lords of the Desolate? Something like, what is the quotation marks the Desolate somehow? And to answer that, and to like try and like make that into some art and some fun stuff, and that could be some cool bosses for like a video game. And so I have like the start of something like both the lore and an entire video game world, where something like these forces are behind much of what happens in that world, so I can in a sense start building levels and you could say characters and cities, towns, kings, castles, but almost something like cultures or trademarks, nations, or something like what happens in this world. So I have like a starting point for like building some stuff, you could say, and and I sort of like began something like finding concept art, where I will start looking for something like concept art, but I don't want to spoil more than this. That something like this might be the bosses, and I want to be a bit careful spoiling more than that, or than this, and so like to give like an idea what it might look like. And then what I want to talk about is that I created this somehow map in I use Samsung Notes, which is something like basically for a writing or notepad in on the Samsung app, that just sort of like if you get a Samsung tablet, then it follows along with like Samsung tablets. I have like an iPad S7 Plus with a nice drawing pen, and then I use the marker pen for just creating something like a sort of like sketch, like a pencil or like a charcoal sketch. And then when I something like have the details something like right, I will like draw on top of that, and the sort of like ink pen always like draws on top, and then it's something like create something like this. And I knew that first of all, I want to say that I feel like it's a great advantage to create something like a map for like your entire Christmas video game, because then you know what you're done, then you know when you're done, and that ultimately it allows you to really focus on certain things in certain areas. For instance, suppose that I have a boss that I want to be in this area, then I can really focus on making this area something like tell the story and something like help people understand, or in a sense enjoy even more, or learning the story and like why this happens, but also just something like the effects and the spectacle and everything. You can create something that once you have like a limited map, you can create something like much more focused entertainment. And that's in a sense what I think making video games is about. It's not just about creating a world where you can run around forever and like blah 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 some stuff, but it's about creating focused experiences and some like fun. It's you want to create. It's sort of like when you get a really nice dish at like a restaurant. They have really focused the best food into like a really good experience, or like a record where they take like the best lyrics a song and a band has created and like really creates the nicest sound, and so like throws a ton of good stuff together, so that there's even more to something like for the audience to enjoy, right? And that's in a sense how you create entertainment, I think. So the first thing I know is that I want something like an intro area, which is something like a wasteland, or something like a swamp, and basically some like with like so like swamps and sort of like dirt, and sort of like a deserted swamp, you could say, where there's something like mostly dirt, but then also swamp and dead stuff. And then here I want something like more like a cursed forest with something like that's perhaps mildly demonic, and like a forest with something like where some of the trees and some like the landscape has perhaps gotten some like demonic. And then here that's something like more like a half-dead forest, or something like a wasteland with empty groves, and something like a half-dead wilderness perhaps. And then I know here I want something that's fire, and I want something that's frost, and I want something that's undead, or something like what do you call it, specters and zombies, and in a sense ghosts, but perhaps liches and stuff like that has taken over here, so that the different bosses sort of like have these regions. And then the idea is that once you get to one of these castles or something like these towns or cities, that there's perhaps a portal that will teleport you to like another, something like perhaps realm over here that's something like otherworldly, and perhaps both physical and mysterious, and you don't really know why it's there or what the purpose is, but something like some magical places perhaps mixed with like reality. So I think that there are like several idea points here. There's the first of all, I know that once I have built all these maps, then I'm done, and there isn't supposed to be like more in the video game, and this allows me to like tell the entire story, and then ultimately that all of these bosses here will have their own region or area where they make sense, and there will be like enough space to in a sense tell their stories, and in a sense get through all the lore of the video game. And then again, that once I have a defined area, like I can like really focus in, and for instance, the destruction quotation marks end boss, his area will be something like mostly the fire realm here, and that will really allow me to something like create an area that's very very fire, something like this marks his place, and a place where a ton of stuff that's related to that boss happens, and to really focus on this in that area, because I have other areas that I know will be used for telling other stories, and where the other bosses will fit in. And that's sort of like the one of the advantages of having like a map. And then finally, that's something like you could say that that once I have a map, once I start placing something like towns or characters or something like, they become more definitive, or just more rooted in a certain area perhaps, and that helps me perhaps something like with the characterization. Suppose that you have like a king that's living in a rundown castle that's like almost rubble, and then next to him there's a kingdom full of ghosts and dead spirits, what do you call it, dead specters, and so on, the undead, and how that in a sense could impact the personality. Perhaps he's depressed, perhaps he's struggling, he's very stressed to like keep his own people alive or prevent them from dying, and so on, where in a sense having this lore ultimately helps make some of the more difficult theatrical decisions, or how and why should this place be like that, and why does this matter, and could this perhaps help me like understand, or this could make it easier to so on build later stuff in the video game. Also something like the characters, the effects, and something like the post-processing, how is that supposed to be, so that each of these areas are like represented in the way that I finally want them to look, and that somehow is more or less 80, 90, 95% decided by just this map to start with. So drawing this map is a really helpful start, and then it sort of like ultimately says I have to create something like these zones here, and then I'm done, and then I will have told somehow within all these areas, and this is like the first stage of something like making this stuff. But then I'm like, there might be an updated map where I make it more detailed, and then stage 3, perhaps stage 4. But this is like the first drawing of the map, and it's sort of like good enough to do everything I want. But I might want to tweak and update this and create some more stuff, and something that makes sense depending on what happens as I like keep writing this. But I'm really proud of this, and I feel like it's sort of like a milestone, or like a landmark in the development of this video game, and talking about my ideas and like what I hope to achieve as both a developer and someone that's really into coding stuff and so on. But I also love movies and stories and video games and all the fun stuff in Hollywood, and it's a way of like talking about how cool I think some like stuff on television is, and how much I like wish I could contribute to that, or make something like that, or get a bit of that hype, or work on something like that myself. I think that could be really cool. So that's sort of like why I have created this sort of like lore here, and where I'm not really sure what let's see here, like where it's going, but the theme is what is the desolate. And then what are the lords of that, or like the ultimate demons perhaps, and then how do you turn that into a video game, or some fun stuff, or like some really cool characters and theater and like really fun stuff and amazing stories, and then ultimately something like a sum total experience that somehow is a great experience, and there's a ton of lore and you feel it's rewarding, or perhaps it took you places you didn't know or thought or you could, and it somehow adds a little bit to what you know, or your world, or stuff that you hadn't seen before, or something like that. And I think that somehow was interesting about making video games, that you can like try and like add all this together and create something really nice, you can say, for the audience or the fans or the people that purchase these sort of like electronic products. And then I'm also really proud that for now I have the five classes here: the Lost Warrior, the Cursed Merchant, the Wicked Amazon, the Madness Sorcerer, and the Ostracized Cleric. And the idea is that the Lost Warrior is a little bit a criminal, and they're all like a bit on the edge, or like a bit in trouble, and perhaps criminals, and they don't really have enough friends or support, or perhaps savings, or really enough going for them, that once demons or like Dark Souls or nasty stuff takes over, they could sort of die rather fast, or get hurt, or in a sense get in a ton of trouble if suddenly demons took over and sort of like there were like nasty monsters everywhere. So it's sort of like also in a sense to try and tell the story of like what happens to the losers when the world goes wrong. What about their stories? Do they have important lives? Should you support them or not? What do you think about, as it were, perhaps the mild or the modest losers in society? Should they have a chance? Do you think that in a sense one should tell their story? Do they matter or not? And that's also in a sense one of the questions of the video game, where I think that some totally it's somehow some rather amazing stuff. And then finally, like I said in the first video, that in a sense it's also a little bit something like I actually think it's difficult to make stuff in the art world, and a ton of art and paintings and drawings and even like theater and stuff like that. I don't think it's necessarily that easy to be an artist, or it's rather difficult work. And it's somehow also a little bit like talking about how I think it's difficult to make art and sell it and be popular, and in a sense the responsibility to both be an entertainer but also a role model, that I don't necessarily think you could separate those two, and how you in a sense get through all that and in a sense maintain your integrity, or also something like what you ultimately wanted to work on and what your own ideas are, and to get those to the audience in a coherent and really nice way, and to try and you can convince people of the script, and in a sense somehow to perhaps tell them there's more to the world than they perhaps realized, and if you could help people think differently, and they could like reflect on it, perhaps also think about their values, and all the things that really great theater somehow does to people, is somehow a wonderful discipline, and something that I want to add to, and I think that there's as much to be said for like trying to make some fun stuff and entertainment for people. You can just sit down and don't think, just sort of like play some stuff, and somebody else makes something really nice and some condensed entertainment for you, so you really like feel good, or you started thinking about something you didn't know, or perhaps if you needed a break or you had stress, and you can like take you away from that, and in a sense sometimes you can also just like enlighten people, or like teach them new stuff, and there's stuff people perhaps didn't know or hadn't thought of, and there's all these things that happen because of and around the theater that's very interesting, and I want to something like try and explore that, and like also talk about my points of view, and ultimately perhaps how I perceive the world, and if it's good or bad to be alive, and what being a soul and like a citizen or somebody at all, or anybody in this world does to people, and what is this thing called existence, and that's sort of like why I want to make video games, and I think it's sort of like interesting to like mess around with these sort of like game engines, and see if I can get better at that, and somehow take these ideas and turn them into something like really cool, and like a 3D engine. And that's all like that for now, and that's all like my devlog for today, and my project Lords of the Desolate. That's perhaps going to be a PlayStation 2 quality tribute to Lords of the Fallen from 2023 from Hexworks in Poland. And so like again the question is, what is the quotation mark the desolate, and who are the lords, and something like chief sinners, or the nastier demons of something like quotation mark the desolate, and try and like capture that in a video game, and then hopefully make something fun and cool, and people can get entertained, or there's some stuff they hadn't thought about before, and then that's that. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. Bye.